everyone. Welcome to today's Equipping and Enabling training on tactics, how to graciously share your Christian convictions. My name is Allie Carr. I'm the Director of Special Projects at International Commission, and I've had the privilege of serving at IC for over 5 years, and I'm the host for all of IC's E&E trainings. For those of you who are new around here, IC's mission is equipping and enabling believers of the gospel of Jesus Christ worldwide by partnering with local churches in evangelism to share his gospel with unbelievers and make disciples. We send teams all around the world on short-term trips to partner with churches to go out and share the good news of Jesus Christ. We train participants on how to grow in confidence and share the gospel in contextual ways using a variety of simple tools. For over 50 years, IC has been partnering with churches around the globe to strategically equip, enable, reach, and disciple people to Jesus. Each and every year, we receive hundreds of thousands of reports of people who have heard the gospel and have now made the commitment to follow Jesus in nearly every corner of the earth. And we hope to keep going for another 50 years to the glory of God. The purpose of these E&E trainings is to equip and enable you to grow in confidence, to share the gospel and make disciples with a variety of people using different applicable gospel sharing tools. Everything we do as an organization is filtered through the Great Commission, which is found in Matthew 28:18 through 20. Jesus gave his disciples this commission back then, but it still applies to us today. He said to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded. And then Jesus left us with a promise. He said, "Surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." That is a promise. He is with us. We should not fear. If you have fear, if you're struggling with sharing your faith, that comes from the enemy. But we have a spirit of power that is still with us today. So thanks for joining us today as we focus on learning some conversational strategies in order to share what you believe as a follower of Christ. Joining us today is Jonathan Noyse, who serves with an incredible organization called Stand to Reason, whose mission is to train Christians to think more clearly about their faith and to make an even-handed, incisive, yet gracious defense for Christianity and classical Christian values in the public square. Jonathan grew up in Massachusetts and attended American University in Washington, D.C., where he studied criminal justice and later earned a master's degree in Christian apologetics from Biola University. What's interesting about John is that he is a former atheist and spent much of his life arguing against the existence of God. As an atheist, Jonathan used to think belief in God was unwarranted and actually irresponsible. Then, after examining the evidence for Christianity, he was faced with the fact that Jesus is who he says he is, and the Christian worldview tells the true story of reality. Due to his past, Jonathan is now passionate about training Christians to not only think more clearly about what they believe and why, but also to be able to communicate these things to people effectively around them. John has a decade of experience working in the legal field, more than 5 years of experience serving as a pastor in his local church, and he currently lives in California with his wife and 4 daughters. So welcome, John.
Thank you so much for having me, Allie. It's a real privilege to be here. I can't wait.
Oh, good. I'm so excited that you're joining us for the E&E training on tactics, because what you have to teach us is not only invaluable for when we find ourselves in the hot seat in a difficult faith conversation, but just the life perspective you bring to this topic, I'm sure it will help so many people out there watching or listening to this who are thinking, yes, I have a friend or a colleague or a family member who's an atheist or is on the fence about what they believe. And I just don't know what to say to them sometimes when they say these off the wall spiritual things. And like, what questions do I ask? What defense should I have prepared to kind of meet them where they are? So thank you. Yeah, thank you for joining us today. And I'll let you take the floor now to equip and enable us on how we can graciously share our Christian convictions.
That's super, Allie. Thank you. Well, it's great to be with you guys today, and thanks for watching. And thank you for Allie for having me do this E&E training. I'm passionate about sharing what Jesus has done for me, and more importantly, what he's doing for the entire world, because I know what it's like to live without him for so long. I didn't grow up a Christian. Actually, growing up, I didn't know a Christian. If I go back east, I grew up in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and if I go back east to Plymouth and hang out with my old friends, some of which I'm still friends with, they're still not Christian. I mean, they were never a Christian. I don't know if they ever will be. I leave that up to God. And because I think I lived so long without Jesus, I think I know the importance of helping people come to know Jesus. I'm passionate about it because I've experienced the transformation that comes from Jesus introducing himself and then chasing after him. So you fast forward, right? I grew up not a Christian, not an atheist. I was we just faith and religion was just not a part of our life. You know, Christmas was about Santa Claus presents, Christmas trees and lights. Easter was about bunnies and eggs and chocolate and candy. We just didn't talk about Jesus. It's not like my parents were antagonistic. And then in high school, when I started really digging into my worldview, started thinking for myself, I started to really buy into what's called naturalism, right? The idea that everything that exists is the product of a purely physical process. This is all there is. And then by the time I got through college, that atheism, naturalism really blossomed and bloomed into my early professional career. And then in 2005, I ended up moving to Southern California from Washington, D.C., where I was working at a wonderful law firm, an amazing law firm, actually. And I moved out on a whim, kind of. And on my very first night in California in 2005, I met Rihanna, my now wife. My bags were still packed in the back of my sister's car. And she was at a party that my younger sister had brought me to, and her and I got to know each other. And I obviously, like, very obviously, I actually told her I loved her the first night that I met her that night. And she was like sitting right next to her boyfriend, and that caused quite a stir. But like, that's the kind of guy I was. I think that's important because I'm bold, and I've always been bold. And I guess the subjects on which I'm bold about are different now. But that'll play, and you'll get that as we spend a little bit more time together. So anyways, I tell her I love her. She's not that feeling the same thing. It took her a little while to come around. And so as we got to know each other, eventually she did. She dropped that loser and started dating me. And she, for like the longest time, there was something going on, and I didn't know what it was. If she was here doing this with me, she would say that a lot of the time she would leave our dates and she'd leave them crying. And there's two reasons why. Uh, the first is she was hiding something. You see, she was a closeted Christian, and I was this verbose, aggressive atheist. And I would have her over for dinner. I lived in a duplex in Hollywood, right in the heart of Hollywood, the corner of Melrose and Highland. And I would cook her dinner, and I remember after she finally came out as a Christian to me, I had no respect for her intellectual abilities. Now, my wife is extremely smart. Like, she is so smart. And she has her master's in mathematical finance from USC. She's a math girl. Like, oh. And anyways, I remember having her over and I'm talking to her and cooking dinner. And I'd be like, Rihanna, I thought that you were an intelligent human being. Are you telling me that you believe in you believe in Adam and Eve? That's dumb. Nobody believes that stuff. Wait, are you telling me, Rihanna, are you telling me that you don't believe in like the Darwinian synthesis? Like, you don't believe in Darwinian evolution? Everybody believes in evolution. Wait, you believe I would say things like this. This is what I'd say to her. I'd say things like, wait a second, you believe in zombies, but you don't believe in evolution, referring to Jesus, right? The man who died. And then on my view, he died and then was raised again. Is a fictional story, just like we see in television and movies. And her response to me was oftentimes sadness. I mean, how could it not be? She wasn't equipped really to answer the challenges. I was very aggressive, and so she would leave those dates oftentimes crying. The second reason why she was crying is she knew the relationship couldn't go anywhere ultimately, because she couldn't date for me for very long a non-believer. Now, this is not an excuse if you're watching this and you have a non-believing boyfriend or girlfriend. This is not an excuse for you to do missionary dating. It doesn't work out. So don't confuse this story for what I'm really trying to say. I'm trying to point out that I was an aggressive atheist and it affected the people around me. If I found out that you were a Christian, I would want to take you out to coffee to destroy you, at least your worldview. And I would do it in a winsome way, and you would like me because I was fun. I used to ask Rihanna, actually, I still ask her, Rihanna, like, why are you even with me? And she's like, well, why did you start dating me? Well, because you were fun. I was fun, and I would make you laugh in the process. But I made it my life's goal to squash Christians, especially because I thought that their beliefs, I thought that our beliefs, what we share, if you're watching this and you're a Christian, I'm a Christian. I thought that our beliefs were like what Ali said, irresponsible. I thought they were dangerous. I would have said if you were raising Christian kids under the Christian banner, teaching them Christian things, you were guilty of child abuse. Now, my question to you and why I share this up front is how do you respond when you meet somebody like me? Have you ever met somebody like me? And how did you respond? There's usually one of three different types of people in the groups I'm speaking to on this issue here. There's the people who really look forward to the chance to talk to somebody like me. Now, if I'm honest, that's a very small group of people. That's me though. Like I love conflict. I love running into the conflict. If I'm going to talk about Jesus to whoever I can, but not everybody's like me. In fact, I realize the vast majority of people are not like me. There's maybe a bigger group of the people, the second group of people that are very hesitant toward like kind of like I don't really want to talk to you, but I would if I had to. And I think the biggest group represented are people like, please don't come near me. I don't want to talk to anybody like you used to be. And I understand that. And don't be ashamed. There's now no condemnation in Christ Jesus, right? So don't be ashamed of that. We're going to work through that. The reason that I asked that, and then probably put yourself in a group here, most of us might be unwilling to share with somebody like I used to be. I think that well, I think we're afraid oftentimes. Well, why are we afraid? Well, I think there's one of two reasons why we're afraid. I think oftentimes what we do as Christians is the first reason is we put too much pressure on ourselves. Uh, we feel, what do I mean by that? That's a good question. We're going to ask that question later. By putting too much pressure on ourselves, I think oftentimes what we feel like when we engage in a conversation with somebody, we feel like we have to get to the gospel in every conversation. And more than that, we oftentimes feel like I have to get this person saved. And that is a lot of pressure. Why? Because we can't save anything. So it's undue pressure. It's pressure that we can't live up to because we don't save anything, right? It's God who does the saving. So the first point here, if you take nothing more away from this time together, I think that this is valuable here. Take this. You are not responsible for saving anybody. God is. God's going to save whom God saves. We're responsible for what God's given us, and God's responsible for his part. And he never fails. So we can trust on that. And salvation is firmly planted in God's corner. So trust him with it. Now, I think that we're fearful and nervous about sharing because we put too much pressure on ourselves for a good reason. The reason why we put so much pressure on ourselves is because we care, right? I don't know about you, but I have a lot of people in my life who don't know who Jesus is, or they know who Jesus is, but they don't want anything to do with him, even worse. My whole family, my mom, my brother, my sister, all of their families, nieces and nephews, my extended family, my cousins and my uncles and my aunts, none of them know who Jesus is. They don't claim to be a Christian. They don't want to. And the reason why sometimes we put pressure on ourselves and the reason why we want them to be saved so bad is because we care so much about them. So you're starting in the right place. And that brings us to an important principle that's going to be reiterated. As we talk to people, guys, remember that we're talking to people. So we don't want to engage in with people just to have an argument or just to win an argument, even worse. We want to understand that every single person is an image bearer of God. And that means that they're of infinite value, worth, and dignity. And that means they're worthy of our time. And that means that God views them in a very special way. They are part of God's special, amazing creation too. So if we put that on at the onset, I think we can have compassion, but don't put too much responsibility on yourself. The second reason why I think we are fearful, and maybe this fear holds us back from sharing with people, is the first, right? That we put too much pressure on ourselves. The second is that we go into it without a game plan. We don't know where the story is going to go. We don't know where the conversation is going to go. And what if somebody asks us something that we have no idea, like kind of like what Ali alluded to in the intro here? What if somebody asks us a really hard question that we've never thought about? Or what if somebody says something and our response makes us look stupid, or even worse, makes Jesus look stupid? We don't want to do that. And the reason why we're fearful is because we don't have a game plan. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to offer you over the next, I don't know, I got about a half hour left. I'd like to give you guys a game plan. A game plan that works regardless of how much you know or how little you know, how much the person that you're talking to knows or how little they know, and a game plan that can help you navigate just about every conversation. The conversations about faith and evangelism, and also just conversations about everything. In fact, I'm going to recommend that as we go through this game plan, you practice it in every type of situation, whether it be at home if you're a high school student, or a middle school student, or college student if you're going to talk to your parents, or a professor, or if you're an adult working in your environments wherever God has placed you. Try this stuff out, and let's see what happens. Now, before we get into the game plan, I want to talk about something that I think is incredibly important. I get to travel the world. I have my dream job. I love what I do. And I do this. I train Christians, and it's so much fun. And I love the best part about the job. What I love the most is I get to meet people face to face. Zoom stuff like we're doing here is difficult for me because all I see is this black little dot and I'm staring into, but I'd like to imagine you guys right now watching this. And the more I get to travel, the more people I get to meet, and the more conferences I get to go. I go to a ton of different conferences, and something has become incredibly clear to me. Like, there's great scholarship, there's great content out there. And sometimes I go to these really impressive conferences with these amazing theologians, amazing Christian apologists and philosophers, and they're incredibly bright and incredibly smart. But what they're saying is incredible, but I don't know how to let this knowledge that I'm gaining trickle down from mental assent down into my very soul. Like, how do I knit it together with my very being so that I can communicate these things in a way that is doing what people want it to do, right? We don't just come to know God just to know God, right? We come to know God so that other people might come to know God, right? Go and make disciples of all the nations is what Jesus says, right? So we want to be about that. So we can't just let it rest as mental assent. So I noticed something. There's a lack. There's a missing bridge between the content and the conversation and the scholarship and the relationship, and I'd like to form that bridge. And there's an insight that came to me. This is all through Greg Koukl, my boss and mentor. He wrote a fantastic book. It's called Tactics, and it's what this presentation is based off of. So you can go in deeper if you buy that book, Tactics by Greg Koukl. But it's an insight that Greg has stressed to us as a team. And when he brought this stuff up to me now, probably 6 or 7 years ago, before I was at Stand to Reason, it really helped me realize something. And it goes back to that pressure point that I talked about, that we put too much pressure on ourselves. There are two different types of people here. And the reason why there's this missing bridge between the content, the conversation, the scholarship, and the relationship is because we get stuck. And it has to do with we're confused about our role in kingdom building. And this might be reassuring to some of us that are watching this right now. There's two different types of people. There's gardening and there's harvesting. There's gardening, and there's gardeners, and there's harvesters and harvest. I have an accent, so you guys are gonna have to work through that. I grew up in Boston, Plymouth, so it comes in and out. I'm so sorry. We'll work through it together, I promise. When I came to this knowledge, it kind of transformed how I do evangelism. Right before any harvest in any individual's life, there has to be a substantial season of gardening. Right, most people have seasons of gardening before they are harvested, and put this in spiritual terms. When I was an atheist, my story isn't somebody preached the gospel to me and I just converted right then and there. I don't have that kind of story. I know some people do. Some of you guys might do, and praise God for that. But I think if we were to ask each other our stories, I think what we would see is before we became a Christian, there was a substantial period of time with some relationships coming into our lives, and soil being tilled in our lives, questions being asked and answers being given, and substantial wrestling happened before you became a Christian. And this is my story, and this is the story of most of the Christians I know. In fact, this is actually nothing new. Okay, Jesus talks about this in John 4. So in John 4, you guys probably all know the scene, right? Right. Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says, do they not say, therefore there are 4 months and comes the harvest, right? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look to the fields, that they are white for harvest. Now he's probably watching. I think he's probably watching people come down towards the fields, which is so cool. Anyways, that's a whole nother story in general, another talk. But then he says already, and pay attention to this is really good stuff. He who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for life eternal, right? So they're gathering all of the field is white for harvest, and they're going to go out and they're going to be preaching the gospel, and all of these new Christians are going to be converted. And it's going to be amazing, so that he who sows and he who reaps can rejoice together. For in this case, listen to this. The saying is true. One sows and the other reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored and have entered, and you have entered into their labor. Now, notice what he's saying, that there's two different types of people. There's those who sow, and then there's those who reap. There's those that spend time with people, and like anybody, like that maybe people right now, I pray that somebody's sharing the gospel or sharing the truths about Jesus and the Christian worldview with my brother and my sister and my mom. Maybe this is you too. Maybe you have family who's wayward, and then my prayer is that people are sharing that. These people are sowing seeds of faith into their lives. And then comes along somebody who reaps. So there's two groups, those who sow and those who reap. But notice that we're one team. We get to rejoice together. Like think of it this way, like if somebody, okay, so say I say we hang up, I close the Zoom meeting and we're done. I say goodbye to Allie, and everything is said and done. And at the end of our time, my mom calls me on my cell phone, which is right here, right? Say my mom calls me and she says, John, the most amazing thing has just happened to me. I met this man. He was a pastor, and I spent time with him, and I sat down and we had coffee, and it just started to click. And John, I'm a Christian now. Like, do you think I'm going to be like, wait a second, hold on. Like, I've been gardening in your life now for 17 years. You're in my garden. You're my fruit. How dare he walk into my garden and pluck my fruit? No, of course not. I'm going to join in my mom and this stranger pastor who just led her to the Lord. I'm going to say, praise God, right? Because we're all one team and we rejoice together. So the key takeaway here, guys, before we get into the plan, the nuts and the bolts, there's two groups of people. There's gardeners and there's harvesters, and there's one season and there's one team. And as the season approaches, that the fields are white with the harvest, we can rejoice together as people become saved. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think most people that are watching this video right now, instead of being harvesters, I think you're gardeners. I think harvesters are actually rare. I'm friends with a professional. I say professional because that's what he does for a living. Evangelist. He travels all over the world, all over the world. Okay, and speaks in front of millions of people. And I've literally been at conferences with him where we step into the elevator, and by the time we get from the first floor to the fifth floor, he's led like 3 people to the Lord. How's he do it? Because that's not how I work. It like for me, it's difficult. It's like, and if I'm confessing something to you guys, man, I don't know if I've led any. I've led one person to the Lord this year. And here I am, a professional Christian apologist. What a loser I am, right? No, I'm not a loser because I'm just sowing seed. And this is my point. I think a lot of us watching this are gardeners. We just need to be faithful with the position that God has put us in. Take the pressure off of yourself. Don't try to be something you're not, right? Not everybody could be these major apologists, these major evangelists. Not everybody's going to have, lead 1,000 people to the Lord. We just need to be faithful with God's given us. And I think God has given us, a lot of us, the gift of gardening in people's lives. So be confident that and make the most of any brief opportunity that you might have. So how do we do that? How do we make the most of every opportunity we have? Well, we need that game plan that we talked about, so that gardeners can be gardeners and harvesters can be harvesters. So let's talk about that. And that's going to get into the second reason. We just addressed kind of the first reason why I might be fearful, put too much weight on ourselves. Well, maybe that's because you're trying to be a harvester and you're not. It's okay to be a gardener. I do most of the time I do gardening. But now the second reason why we're fearful not to engage with people, and that fear leads us to not want to engage with people, is because we don't have a game plan. So let's look at the game plan. See, my goal is simply to do a little gardening. That's all I want to do. And then at Stand the Reason, we have a saying, we just want to put a stone in someone's shoe. So what we do is we want to just get people thinking about something that maybe in a different way that they haven't ever thought about it in the past. And I don't know if you've ever had a stone in your shoe. I get stones in my shoe often, especially if I'm going to the beach or coming home from the beach. Like, think about it, that feeling that you get, the stone doesn't kill you. It's not like, this is going to kill me. No, it's this annoyance that's in your shoe. You kind of got to sit down. You got to get it out right then and there, but it's not killing you. So what I'm saying is I want you to be annoying, like a stone in somebody's shoe, annoying for the gospel in a good way, of course, annoying for Jesus. No, the goal here is to just get people to think about something important, maybe in a different fashion or a different way than they have before. And how do we do that? Well, that's a good question. How do we initiate a conversation in a way that doesn't seem weird or awkward, or that kind of protects us from getting trapped, or, like I said before, looking foolish or stupid, or even worse, making the gospel or Jesus look stupid. We don't want to do that. How do we engage in a way that keeps us from getting in over our head, or lets us get out graciously if we do get in over our head? Well, that's what the game plan is going to be that we're going to talk about. And the game plan I'm going to share with you has to do with simply asking questions, and we're going to ask some strategic questions that once you memorize and once you practice, it's crazy how easy this is. It's very practical and very easy. Actually, during the presentation, you're going to think to me, John, this isn't going to work. And then you're going to go out and you're going to try it, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, it works. It's crazy. So how do we defend our faith without being defensive or offensive? Like, we don't want to be offensive either. We don't want to start a fight, because when you're fighting with somebody, nobody wins, right? So this game plan, it's going to allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know, or how aggressive or knowledgeable the other person is. And then Paul alluded to this game plan in Colossians when he said, let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to somebody. No, he's saying, let your speech always be with grace. He's saying, be nice. Be nice to people, seasoned with salt, so that you will know. He's saying there, not only be nice, but be smart. Be smart. And then the third part of it is be tactical. Know how to respond to each person, and not get into a fight, and not argue or be quarrelsome, because nobody wins when we're that way. Me personally, I'm not attacking the people who do this. I think there's people that are talented that do things, but I don't like the gotcha moments on YouTube or TikTok. Christian destroys atheist. I'm not trying to destroy anybody. I'm trying to share the love of Christ that's been shared with me. My prayer ultimately is that the people that I'm talking to will be transformed in their heart and their mind. I'm not trying to twist them into some, twisted pretzel of logic. I'm just trying to engage. I'm not trying to manipulate them. I'm trying to manage the conversation. And I'm trying to, and this is what the tactic's going to do. It's going to allow us to maneuver through conversations, and ultimately, the most important part is keep us in the driver's seat. So, okay, how do we do that? Well, we're going to learn this tactic. It's called the Columbo tactic. Now, some of you, or if you guys are older, you guys might remember who Lieutenant Columbo is. A lot of people don't remember who Columbo is. He had a primetime TV show back in the day. He was a detective, kind of like a buffoon at first. You thought he was an idiot. But then as he started to investigate it, he realized that he was incredibly intelligent. And the way that he navigated the case was by asking questions. That's the key to this tactic, to the Columbo tactic, is simply ask questions. And this is how you, as a Christian, can go on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions, in order to advance a conversation in the hopes of ultimately getting to the gospel, or at least putting a stone in somebody's shoe. So this is the game plan, Columbo. We ask questions. Why ask questions? That's a good question. Because think about it, questions are polite. When you ask questions, you're gaining information and knowledge, which Paul just talked about, knowledge about what that person really believes. Questions, they take the focus off of us, right? It gives and gives us valuable information in order to steer and guide a conversation. And most importantly, it keeps you in the driver's seat. It keeps you in control of the conversation. When we ask questions, realize we don't have to do anything. We don't have to know anything. We just ask questions. And if we're honest with each other, guys, like when I have conversations with people, most of the time, most people like to talk about themselves. I like to talk about myself. I'm going to talk about myself a lot during this presentation, probably. It's very comfortable for us to talk about ourselves. So when you're asking questions about what people believe and why they believe it, most of the time, people are very, very comfortable talking to you about it. And especially if you can do these things in a way that's conversational, which we're going to get to in a minute. I love Francis Schaeffer. He's a fantastic author. He's gone to be with the Lord now. But I really love this statement of his. He says, if I only have an hour with someone, I'll spend the first 55 minutes asking questions and finding out what's troubling their hearts and their mind. Then the last 5 minutes, I'll share something of the truth. And I love that because I go back to that tip, and I'm going to say this a lot because I have a heart for people. I love people. And that's what leads my evangelism, my love for people. And every morning when I wake up, my house is going off. Allie said, I have 4 daughters. Okay. I got a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 7-year-old. You guys be praying for me. Somebody is always crying in my house, and it's usually me in like the fetal position, wondering what in the world has happened because I have no idea. I've never been a girl. and especially now that I've got 14, 12, and 11, they're like doing things. I'm like, what's going on? But the point is my house is always going off and I'm busy. And I get 2 seconds in the morning to offer something up to God before they leave for school. I make their lunches every morning, and then I work from home. And I swing my feet over the edge of my bed and I say, Lord God, this is the day that you've made perfect and right. Thank you for using me, and use me according to your master plan, not mine. And I said, God, and I always say this, I say, God, allow me today to see people as you see them. Because I want to see people as God sees them, because I think God loves everybody. Not everybody's saved. Not everybody's going to be saved. That's not what I'm saying. But God so loved the world that he gave his only and only son for them. And I want to put that on. So when I'm talking to people, I want to hear what's troubling their hearts and their minds. Why? So I can better address the actual issue. Because oftentimes when we bring things up, we bring things up that they're not even really struggling with. So I want to listen a lot. And then one of the ways that we do that is through asking questions. And then I'll share the gospel with them. And then I'll share the truth. But I want to listen so I get to know people, because I think that's what God would do. And by the way, Francis Schaeffer didn't come up with this. Greg Kokel didn't come up with this. I certainly didn't come up with this method. Look at Jesus. Jesus asked a lot of questions. This is according to Paul Weston, and he's a missiologist. Jesus asked 284 questions throughout the Gospels, right? And why do you think that is? Do you think Jesus asked a lot of questions because he doesn't know stuff? No, he knew everything. He's the Lord of heaven and earth. He's the Alpha and the Omega, right? He knows everything. His knowledge is all encompassing. But he asked questions because he understood the rhetorical power behind questions. So basically what I'm asking you to do is put a stone in somebody's shoe and be like Jesus. Ask a ton of questions, and use them as a means to get to the truth ultimately. So what are these questions? That's a good question. See, I'm leading with questions, right? So here's the first application of Columbo. How do you gather information? You ask questions, right? A question, it can be a conversational starter that's asked in a casual way. It can help you know how to proceed in a conversation. And questions, they can buy you valuable time. If you don't know something, you can ask another question. And keep in mind, the first step of critical thinking is to always clarify a claim. So when somebody makes a claim, you want to get clarity to it. You want to understand the claim as they understand it. And you're going to ask a specific question. And that specific question is there on the screen. What do you mean by that? Now I'm going to have to trust you because I'm not there with you. But on the count of 3, everybody is going to repeat this question. If you're there by yourself, don't be embarrassed. Nobody can see you. If you're in a group, don't be embarrassed because everybody else is going to do it. But we need to learn these questions. So what do you mean by that? On the count of 3, everybody repeat, what do you mean by that? You ready? 1, 2, 3. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? This is our first question. I think that you can probably memorize it. You guys probably have, what did you mean by that, already memorized in your mind now. Notice that this is a clarification question. You're finding out what this person believes. You're asking more about what they're saying. And it doesn't have to sound just like, what do you mean by that? It could be, I'd like to know more about your thoughts on what you just said, or can you explain what you mean by what you just said, or what's that mean for you? You can ask, or you could ask, could you define that for me if they're using a word that you don't understand, or maybe you want to make sure that you're operating on a shared definition of a term, like love, for example. Our culture defines love differently than the Bible defines love. So if somebody mentions love, you could say, well, hold on. Well, it's the loving thing to do. Somebody could say about X, Y, or Z. And you could say, well, what do you mean by love? You see how you've asked a question, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah. So the question is what do you mean by that? And let's throw out some examples. Okay. For example, okay, this one here. I used to say, there is no God. There is no God. What's a question that you could ask? Well, you could ask this. What do you mean by God? Because a lot of people have a lot of different understandings of God, and you might actually find that the person you're talking to doesn't believe in the same God you don't believe in. For example, when I was an atheist, when I said I don't believe in God, I had a certain picture in my mind about who God was. I would have said, yeah, I don't believe in that sky daddy that's waiting for you to mess up so he can throw lightning bolts and punish you. Whoa, I don't believe in him. That's not the God I believe in, you know. So there we go. We find common ground. We don't believe in the same false God, you know. But do you think it's important to understand when somebody says they don't believe in God, what their ideas about God are? Of course it is. You know, so just what do you mean by that? Or how about this statement? I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. What's a question you could ask? Well, what do you mean by that? Sure. But what you could also ask the question, what do you mean by atheist? Don't assume that the person understands what they mean by that either. You know, let them squirm a little. Let them offer you what they really believe. You don't need to fill in the blanks. They need to fill in the blanks because there's different types of atheists. For example, there are atheists that believe in the soul, right? Do you think it'd be important for us to know if somebody says I'm an atheist and they believe in an immaterial aspect of ourselves? Of course. Well, one, it's common ground that they have with us, but then you can ask another question, a follow-up question about substance dualism or one of these that's just a fancy term for believing in the body and the soul, right? Like how do they justify that on their worldview? Because remember it before when I said that I was an atheist, everything that exists is purely physical, but yet you're depositing so that means you're not a naturalist, but it'd be important to know that. What do you mean by atheist? You know, or how about this one? Everything's relative. I love it when people say this because it's a great opportunity. What do you mean by that? You can ask. What do you mean by relative? The question I like to ask, I'd say, is that statement relative? Right? Because the person who says everything is relative believes that there's no factual truths. There's no actual truth claims out there. It's all just a matter of personal preference. It's all subjective. Every claim is about what you think about something. It's not objective. There's no truth about the objects out there. It's all about feelings and cultural conventions and what's taboo or not. So if somebody says everything's relative, you could ask the question, is that statement relative? Because you see that person, their worldview self-destructs right at the get-go, because that statement is a claim to truth. Everything is relative is a claim to say everything is actually relative. So you could ask a question, and right then and there, you're causing them to think more deeply about what they believe and why. How about this one? Oh, you're intolerant. I mean, I don't have the time to really go through this, but a great thing to say to this would be, what do you mean by tolerant? You see, our culture, just like with love, has come to appropriate and redefine the word tolerance, right? Tolerance has come to mean, the cultural understanding of tolerance means total acceptance, uh, not just acceptance, but even encouragement now, no matter to what ends, you know, but that's not tolerance. You know, you don't agree with, like, you don't agree with things that you tolerate, right? You agree with things you agree with. To tolerate something means inherently to put up with something you disagree with, right? You don't tolerate things that are enjoyable or that you share all this common ground with. So they've redefined that. So it'd be good to understand if they're operating on a faulty definition of tolerance. So you're intolerant. Okay. What do you mean by intolerant? What do you think tolerance is? But also notice here, and this is just free advice. You can take this for what it's worth. Notice here, when somebody says something like you're intolerant, all they're really doing is calling you a name. So you could respond, well, you're intolerant. Oh yeah, well, you're ugly and your mother knows it. You could respond like that, but no, of course we don't, because we're Christians and we shouldn't respond like that. But oftentimes, to prove a point, you could respond like that. Oh yeah, you're ugly. Okay, now that we've both just called each other a name, can we get back to the conversation at hand? You see what I've done? You know, I've through, you know, just a rhetorical device, just taken the kind of hopefully lowered the pressure in the conversation, but also shown them that you got to do more than just call me a name. And also, let me remind you, Christian, that we should be the least offendable people on the planet because we got Jesus, right? Jesus gets to say who I am, nobody else. And when we put on that identity, nobody can take that from us. So you can say whatever you want to me. You can call me whatever name you want. And I'm going to do my best not to get offended because I know who I am in the truth of the matter. According to the true story of reality, I'm a son of God. which is really a powerful thing. Anyways, you're intolerant. What do you mean by tolerance? You could point that out. So that's our first question. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Right. And don't be surprised here, guys, if you ask that question, what do you mean by that? And they're completely unable to answer, whoever it is that you're talking to. Because oftentimes people haven't thought about what they mean, especially in today's day the day and age, where we're ruled by sound bites and 35-second Instagram posts or TikToks, right? We're taught now today to think in sound bites. So when you ask, what do you mean by that? Don't be expected don't be surprised rather if you hear crickets in response, because and this is true for Christians too. If I'm being honest, oftentimes we haven't thought through what we mean by the words that we say. So ask this question all day long. What do you mean by that? This is the first application of Columbo. Do you guys see how easy it is? It's really simple. I told you guys at the beginning, you're going to think I'm crazy. This is not going to work. It is going to work. Just try it out. Ask it all day long. Ask it every day. And if there's any ambiguity, or you don't know what somebody means, instead of rushing in with your own thoughts about it, ask them what they mean about it. What do you mean by that? Ask more questions and then have them spell it out for you. It's a powerful thing. It's a really powerful thing. And notice that just one question. Notice what we've done. Just asking that one question, what do you mean by that? You've engaged the person where they're at. You've shown a genuine interest in the person. This is a really important point. Just like I want to see people as God sees them, the point behind that is that if you're not interested in having a conversation with somebody, don't have a conversation with them. It's okay. But if you're going to talk to somebody, be genuinely interested in them. Show them interest. And one way that we do that is by asking questions. Notice we also have caused this person to think. Hopefully that's that stone in the shoe, hopefully in a way that they've never thought before. You're driving them deeper into what they believe. You're asking them now to describe what they believe. And notice that there's no pressure. There is absolutely no pressure on you right now. You've offered no information. All you've done is ask questions. What do you mean by that? Piece of cake, right? Okay, let's move to the second question, and then we'll wrap up here. Before we see the second question, I want to talk to you about something called burden of proof. Now, most of you guys probably understand this. I'm from the legal world, so this is a pretty big deal. The burden of proof, it's a generally accepted principle, right? There's two parts to any argument, right? There's the claim, and then there's the evidence. And and the person that is responsible for supplying the evidence is the one who made the claim. That's the burden of proof. If you make a claim, you have the burden then to prove that claim. And this next question, it makes the person that we're talking to defend their own views. They need to have more than a good imagination. They need to have reasons why they believe what they believe. So the first question gets to the question, what they believe. The second question now is, why do they believe it? Give me evidence. Where's the evidence? Show me the evidence. And this is actually the number one issue I see happening out there in the world today with Christians especially. We rush in to conversations and assume a burden that's not our own. For example, like if somebody says, like you believe in the misogynistic, evil God because of what he did to the Canaanites. Okay, well, I would start off by asking, well, flesh that out for me. What do you mean? And oftentimes what I see is instead of fleshing it out, what we do is I'm pointing the fingers back at me, right? I would rush in with the justification. Oh, well, you don't understand Canaanite culture. If you did, you'd understand that it isn't genocide because God doesn't commit genocide, because God is all just and he's holy and he's just judging people for their sin, just like he's going to judge everybody for their sin. So ultimately that same judgment, I'm going to try to offer all these apologetic answers for it. But notice, I don't need to at this point, because all this person has done is made a claim. They have the burden of proof now to explain why they believe what they believe. And that's what this next question gets at. Do you know why you believe what you believe? The first one tells us what they believe. The next question, this question here, tells us why they believe it. Show me the evidence. And that question is how did you come to that conclusion? How did you come to that conclusion? Okay, on three. How did you come to that conclusion? You ready? 1, 2, 3. How did you come to that conclusion? See, don't you feel silly? You did it. I know you did it. That's great. No, but how did you come to that conclusion? What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Right. And this is actually the second step in critical thinking. It's to determine the justification for the claim. So this is the key question. You can say things like, it doesn't need to be strictly, how'd you come to that conclusion? It could be, why did you say that? Or why do you say that? Or what are the reasons that you have for holding that view? Notice this also, asking this question, it assumes the person actually has reasons to come to the conclusions that they've come to. It assumes that you're assuming the best of somebody with this question because you're assuming that they can actually give you the evidence. But I'm telling you, if you ask this question, just like with the first, you might get the sounds of silence. You might just get crickets, because, and the Christian is guilty of this too, guys. But oftentimes we might be able to repeat a soundbite. We might know what we mean by certain words, but then we start asking for justification for holding any given belief. And sometimes our views are an inch deep and a mile wide, and we want to make that person go deeper. And many people have never thought through their views, and they don't know why they hold them. They just do. So this next question, the first question, what do you mean by that? Second question, how'd you come to that conclusion? I also noticed the third part is that this shows why they believe what they believe, something I've already mentioned here. So let's look at some examples before we wrap up. I love this one. we live in a multiverse. God didn't create it. What's a question that you could ask? Well, you could ask, what do you mean by multiverse? Or what do you mean by God? Or any of these things? That's our first step. That's great. But if we take it to the next step, ask the question, what evidence do you have for a multiverse? Notice I'm not jumping into offering evidence against the multiverse. I'm just asking them, hey, what evidence do you have? And this is an important question, because how much evidence do we have for a multiverse? Zero. So next time somebody says that, just say, what? Okay, well, if you know what multiverse, you know what the terms mean, you don't need to add any clarity. You can skip the first question, you go straight to the second. How'd you come to that conclusion? What evidence do you have that the multiverse exists? How about this one? I just wrote a blog on this. Actually, I was finishing it up before I hopped on this call. The Bible is full of contradictions. Know what I do when somebody says that to me? I say, oh, the Bible's full of contradictions. Usually, oftentimes I have a Bible with me. I just take it out of my bag or my pocket or whatever. And I say, oh, can you show me one? And what do you think they do? Nobody has ever been able to show me a contradiction. Why? Because there aren't any. There aren't any. There's mystery and there's difficult passages, but there's no contradictions. The mystery is not the same thing as a contradiction. A difference isn't the same thing as a contradiction. And there's no mistakes. So you ask the question, oh yeah, can you show me one? What makes you think that there's contradictions? Here's the Bible. So I'm placing the burden of proof on them. I'm placing the burden of proof. Or how about this one? All religions are the same. Oh yeah? How'd you come to that conclusion? All we need is a little bit of background knowledge. Take the major three monotheistic religions. You've got Judaism, you've got Islam, and you've got Christianity. And take a major figure in all three, Jesus Christ, major figure of world history. And what do they say? And who do they say Jesus Christ is? Because they don't all say the same thing, right? On Islam, Jesus is a high prophet, but he never died on a cross, and that means he was never raised. He's certainly not God. On Judaism, he's a false prophet, died on a cross and was buried and stayed dead. And on Christianity, he's the God man who died for the sins of the world and then was raised again. All three of those claims, they can't be true at the same time. They could all be false, sure, but they can't all be true. That means all religions certainly can't be the same. But ask them to explain that to you. How have you come to that conclusion in light of the person of Jesus? What do each major world religion say about that man? So I'm not assuming the burden here. I'm offering a question. What do you mean by that? How have you come to that conclusion? How have you come to the understanding that all religions are the same? Show me. Prove it. Show me the evidence. Show me the evidence. Now, okay. You might one day get yourself in a hot seat. I call it the hot seat. I get myself in the hot seat. And what I mean by that is sometimes I find myself talking to somebody who knows an awful lot more about a topic than I do. And it can be scary. What happens when you step out and you're finally like, hey, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to do this. What happens when you butt up against somebody who clearly knows more than you? Let me tell you a story. Okay. I was in Boston. I was sitting with a friend, and we were talking about something called the Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God, right? Fancy name, just it's an argument from where did all the stuff come from? What caused the beginning of the universe? Okay. And I'm completely crushing it in the conversation. I am so proud of myself. I'm glorifying God, yes, but I'm also like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. My apologetics training has come out. This is years ago. This is probably a decade ago, 10 years now. And I'm crushing my audience. I had 3 friends sitting on the floor and I'm just talking informally, crushing it for Jesus. I'm having a good time. And then one of my friends says, hey, John, do you mind if we call a friend in? He lives next door. Do you mind if we call a friend in to talk about this? Because he likes science stuff and he might have something to add. And he's an atheist. I said, sure, no problem. Whatever. I'm crushing you. I'll crush this atheist too. Right. Horrible attitude. And they called their neighbor over, and their neighbor's home, and he comes over. What they didn't tell me is that their neighbor is a PhD from MIT in molecular biology. Uh-oh. All of a sudden, and very quickly, I realized that this young man knows way more than I do. He knows so much more than I do. I can't even start keeping up. And what do? Do I run for the hills with my tail between my legs? No, because I have a game plan. I have a tactic, right? I know how to get out of the hot seat. And it's simple. As it is with most things, guys, you just be honest. What I said to him, I said, hey, it is clear to me that you know way more about this topic than me. I so appreciate you coming over here and setting me straight. I was wondering, do you think that you could slow down, pause for a minute, let me get a pencil and pen or pen and paper, and then can you continue to beat me up, but just do it slowly and thoroughly, and let me take notes as you completely destroy my arguments so then I can go back and look at what you're saying and then get back to you. Can I have some time to think about this? You see, I'm honest with them. I mean, I had fun with the language and being a little bit sarcastic. I'm sarcastic. So I asked for some time just to think about it. What do you think he said? Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to crush this Christian. This is great. You're open-minded about being crushed. Fantastic. Well, great. And then notice what happens here is I take the pressure off of me. I don't need to respond. I don't know. Instead of making a bunch of stuff up or pretending I'm smarter than I am, I'm just going to be truthful. I don't know what I'm talking about. You know way more. Teach me. And then I sat down, I took notes. And then you know what I did? I went back home. I investigated what he said. I read a book or two. And then I actually got back to him, or I talked to a friend or two. And notice what's happened here is instead of like retreating with my tail between my legs, getting beat up in front of people, looking stupid or feeling like I look stupid or making Jesus look stupid, like we said at the beginning, what I did is I was honest and I got a free education. Now, I've continued a relationship with this young man. Now we're old men, well, middle-aged men, and because he's about my age. And now whenever I have a question on science, specifically evolution, instead of me going read 20 books trying to figure stuff out, what I do is I just call him, or more likely I direct message him through Facebook or whatever, and say, hey, I heard this. Can you explain this to me? I've made a friend. I'm gaining an education. And now I have an ongoing conversation to evangelize somebody that needs to know who Jesus is. All of this from question asking. And it really is that easy. So get out of the hot seat. Just be honest. Can I have some time to think about this? Make sure, though, if you say that I'm going to get back to you, you get back to them. And what I've done is I've also kept a file on all this stuff because, believe it or not, guys, I get beat up all the time when I go out on the street, and I do it a lot. I go to Santa Monica Pier, I go to local colleges, public universities, and just do speaking out in the community for fun. And I get beat up all the time. But when I get beat up, what I do is I take notes of that. I go back, I research it, I find answers to these questions. I keep a file on them in my computer of all these issues and all these questions. And then before you know it, now I have an extensive file from doing this for the last decade that now I have stuff to rely on. And then I'm become stronger in my faith. So actually beating up, right? So it's Paul. Paul said that tribulation produces perseverance, proven character, a hope, and a hope that does not disappoint. It's in our tribulations and the trials that God builds us up. So keep that in mind as you're getting beat up a little bit. It's worth it for Jesus. So what have we done? Okay. We've looked at it. We've given a tactic. We looked at there's harvesters and gardeners, right? There's those who are going to be sowing seeds, and then they're going to be reaping fruit with this one team. And we just need to be what God has called us to be. Many of us are just gardeners, and that's good. We need gardeners. Gardeners are important because there's no harvest without gardeners, and there's no harvest without harvesters either. So whatever team you're on, it's important that we don't need to be afraid to share our faith. We don't need to be anxious about it. We just need to be who we are and who God's made us to be, because we're going to trust God to do what God's going to do. God is going to save people, and he's going to use us to do it, which is so cool. And then the second part is we don't need to, we can go into these conversations with confidence, because now we have a tactic. What's the first question? What do you mean by that? The second question, how have you come to that conclusion? With these things in your pocket, and you practice them all day long, ask till the cows come home, man, everybody. Now, just be careful, because like there is powerful and they can go wrong. Warning. If, if your wife says, John, you're a real idiot, I'm not going to ask her what she means by that, because she'll probably tell me, which will be really embarrassing. But other than that, apart from that, guys, have fun with it. Go out there. If you're watching this in a small group, practice with each other. Put on an atheist hat or a Hindu hat, and go out there and ask these questions of each other in every circumstances. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? And with that, you have a game plan to share your faith with no pressure on you. And hopefully you'll engage in good conversation, making new friends in the process. So I appreciate your time, guys. Thank you.
Amazing, John. Thank you so much. The points are so simple. It's just 2 simple questions. You just got to memorize those, put the burden back on them. And I just love everything that you shared, especially with the sower and the harvester, because I think for those of us who are so passionate, we want to be that person that's like leading them to Christ, right? But that's not always going to be the case. And the sowing is so important. And to your point as well, you're praying for your family to come to Christ. There's people in my life that I'm praying the same. I'm praying that someone else who's in their life will be sowing those seeds, because you don't know when one day it'll all just click. And it wasn't just because of one conversation or one comment that was made or one thing they heard somewhere. It's like everything collectively together, God will use to then lead them to repentance and faith in Christ. So thank you for making that point specifically, because every gospel conversation, every conversation we have about God is important. It's sowing a seed, and that's a win. It's not a fail.
And that's part of what you're doing, with these training videos. You're equipping people to do that. So praise God. I really appreciate the time here with you.
Yes, thank you. You too. Well, I'm sure many people are wondering, and I'm wondering, you were very bold about the fact that you were a bold, confrontational atheist, that you were ready to put up a fight with a Christian. So how, John, did you end up coming to Christ? If you want to share whatever story that is in a nutshell, what was it for you?
Yeah. So it was all that gardening, right? So eventually Rihanna, she was really brave. She asked me to go to church with her. And I've done crazier things for the affections of a woman than go to church. So I was like, hang out with me Saturday. I'll go wherever you want on Sunday. And I had never been to church before. And if I'm honest, it was really weird. Like, I got saved in a charismatic church. So like, as an atheist, if you can picture it, I walk into this church and there's music and the songs are loud. It's super loud. And the songs are about like the blood washing. And I'm just like, what in the world? You people are nuts. And then there's like, the woman spinning in the corner during worship and people prophesying in tongues. And I'm like, you people are nuts. Like, you're crazier than I thought. But the thing is during that experience, like not just that day, but over the course of time, the people at that church were so welcoming and so nice. I actually got discipled by a group of men. Some of them I'm still like really good friends with, where I say they put up with me because they really did, because I would have conversations. I was an atheist in the midst of their groups, pushing back on everything, and I remember having heated conversations with one of my really good friends, Todd, about the pro-life issue, because I was not just pro-choice, I was pro-abortion. And we'd be yelling at each other, but he'd always invite me back, and so there was that gardening that was happening. And then what ended up happening is a pastor of that church, he gave me a book on Christian apologetics. And I read that book from cover to cover, and that introduced me to an intellectual side of Christianity that I didn't think existed. And then around that same time, my future in-laws, they gave me a New Believers Bible, which is like, I still have it. It's upstairs right now, but it's edited by Greg Laurie, NLT translation, like really easy to read and understand. Cornerstones of the Faith, a study Bible. It was so great. And I read that cover to cover from Genesis to Revelation in the course of 3 months, because I used to ride the train to work. And so what was happening is God was ministering to my intellect through Christian apologetics, but he was really softening my heart as I encountered him through his word. And during that 3-month period, I just remember wrestling with all of my really, like, they were existential questions, really. They were about pain and suffering and justification for what hurts in my life, and that I was angry at God at. And I realized that not only did Christianity offer me better answers to the reasons for these things, and not only did Christianity offer me better explanation to reality, the way the world really is, it described the way the world really was. Atheism, naturalism fell short. So I used to bring up the problem of evil a lot. I'd say, like, I can't believe in God because he's God, right? An all-loving and all-powerful God should want to eliminate evil, should be able to eliminate evil, but he doesn't, because evil exists, therefore he doesn't exist. That's the problem of evil. Well, but then I realized in my pursuit that getting rid of God doesn't solve the problem. I still had the problem. I still had to explain all the evil in the world. It only gets rid of one of the possible solutions, and it gets rid of the only solution. Enter Jesus. And also during that time reading the Bible, it just seemed to me like the things I used to think about the scriptures just weren't true. Like, it's a bunch of myth stories. That's not so. When I read it, really for the first time, it seemed to me like the authors were trying to convey truth, not fiction. Fictional stories start like, once upon a time, a long, long time ago, or in a galaxy far, far away, right? Those are fictional stories. The accounts that we read are like, read the beginning of Luke, right? I have endeavored to create an account in most excellent Theophilus, right? He's writing so that you may know with certainty the things that have happened, right? Is what he says. It's like, it doesn't sound like fiction. And that was very clear to me. And I owe it, I owe it all to Christ, of course, to God. But my wife she wasn't my wife at the time. We were just dating. And even this can be an encouragement to those of you who are not apologetics minded. She is not apologetics minded, but she was just faithful. She was brave. She was willing to put up with somebody like me for a time and introduce me to Christ through other people and through good resources. And God was faithful in his part, right? As he saved me, ripped me out of the darkness and into his marvelous light. So that's in a nutshell. But Rihanna's amazing. My wife's incredible.
That's great. I mean, that's a great note to end on, is just love, faithful love of believers to those who are different from them, because I get it. It can be scary being face to face with someone who thinks so differently, believes so differently, maybe different personalities, such as you and your wife. But yeah, the bottom line is just being faithful and loving to those around you. And yeah, thanks for sharing your story. I think that'll really speak to a lot of people. And thank you again for your time. This was just an excellent training on how to graciously share your Christian convictions with just 2 questions. What do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? So thank you, John.
It's that easy.
If you're new to our ministry or just want to learn more, there are a lot of ways for you to connect with us. We can be found, of course, on Facebook and Instagram. We're always sharing lots of really great stories from the field and testimonies from around the world of how God is at work and how you can join him in it with us through praying, giving, and going. You can also find all of our past E&E trainings on YouTube. You can subscribe so you know when another training is available. We also have a podcast. It's just International Commission Podcast, available for free wherever you listen to podcasts, where you can also listen to our E&E show where we talk about different topics and interview different people. And there, of course, we have all of our past E&E trainings as well. But for now, you have been officially equipped and enabled to share your Christian convictions using a few tactics. And we hope and pray that you will have spiritual conversations and share the gospel with someone you know very, very soon. We'll see you next time.